Ladies and gents, my name is Xander, aka Diaslayers, and in this video, we're going to discuss some insane and crazy TTKs that you can easily get once you're charged with light using some wonderful exotic weapons in Destiny 2 PvP. Before we go any further, I just gotta say that all the weapons that we're about to discuss may not match with the game footage of that particular weapon, and the reason being is because I just had a mini tornado come through the entire neighborhood, and there's trees down, it cut power lines. I personally still don't have power yet to this day, and I've been without power for the last 5 days, but even so, it is what it is, and so I'm trying to make do. So having said that, I appreciate your understanding tremendously. And moving on, I'm only going to cover all the exotic weapons that can be benefited from having them charged with light, meaning that their TTK can actually decrease from thus being charged with light. Something like, say, the Rat King or the Devil's Ruin, not its laser beam by the way, as that's very powerful when charged with light, but when it's single fire, it's not so powerful, and the same thing is also said with the Thorn and the Lumina, even when it happens to have Blessing of Sky. I went through exotic after exotic after exotic, trying to see all their damage calculations and buffs, thus calculating their TTK decreases, and the ones that I just mentioned weren't affected in their TTKs in the slightest, and the only one that I didn't cover that actually can benefit from this is the Suros, but the reason why I didn't cover that is because the Monte Carlo is actually better, and you'll see why in just a couple of seconds. The only thing left to say is that I'm looking specifically at primary weapons, so by all means, take a chill pill, relax and enjoy, maybe grab some Skittles, and hit the notification button, and let's jump right into the video. Now if you're interested in the perks I'm using to become charged with light, then by all means check out my pinned comment down in the comment section below. But in the meantime, if you happen to see an exotic weapon right there on screen that you want to find out the most about, then by all means, be my guest and skip to that part of the video via these timestamps right there. But if you're like myself and are interested in what all these weapons can do when charged with light, oh boy oh do I got a treat for you. First up is the Crimson, and usually this thing is then doing 31 per crit, exactly what you would see in game, but in reality it's actually doing 30.5. And the reason why we see 31 is because there's a rounding error in the game, and thus we actually see that damage output instead of 30.5. As far as the body shot damage goes, that's only at 19. And when you then calculate this to be a body shot TTK, it's at 1.43 seconds. And I won't lie, that's pretty detestable. But the optimal TTK is a little bit better at exactly 0.87 seconds. Now what makes the Crimson so exotic is number 1, every single kill, regardless of whether or not that's a critical headshot or a body shot, it's going to instantaneously start to regen your health, and that's amazing. However, as soon as you happen to get a critical headshot, but you're also then going to refill the magazine entirely just like that from reserves. If this weapon is masterworked, it's then going to create an orb of light, and as soon as you pick up one orb of light with the right perk, you're then going to become charged with light. And when that's the case, oh yeah, this thing is then doing 37 per crit and 23 per body. And looking at solely body shot damage and body shot damage alone, it's then going to have a body shot TTK at 1.07 seconds, which in all honesty really isn't that bad. But I will say that when you happen to get that critical damage output, 37 per crit, here we go, now we're going, because this thing's only going to take 2 bursts and it can then down you in 0.63 seconds. You heard me right, I said 0.63 seconds. And just so that we're all on the exact same page, here's all that wonderful information that I've just said right there on screen. The main thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that you do not need to have any kind of kill whatsoever in order to get that kind of TTK, and that right there is exceptional. Not too shabby if I would say so myself, but let me know your thoughts about this down in the comment section below. And in the meantime, we can then look at the next weapon, and that's then going to become the Mida Multi-Tool. Way back when in Destiny 2 Year 1, this thing was dominant in PvP for a very long time, and that's because it could do some crazy good things for primary battle engagements. But ever since then, we got special weapons, and special weapons are becoming dominant, and thus this Mida Multi-Tool is kind of taking a back seat. But with charged with light, that might change, and let me explain exactly how. Usually, the Mida only does 54 per crit and 31 per body. When this is the case, its body shot TTK is at 1.8 seconds, whereas its optimal TTK is at 0.9 seconds. However, as soon as you happen to become charged with light, this thing then does 37 per body and 65 per crit. Yes, 65 per crit, and this means that this thing no longer needs 4 crits to actually down somebody, and rather it only needs 3. With those kind of damage values that I just mentioned, it's then going to do a body shot TTK at 1.43 seconds, which is still pretty darn bad, but its optimal TTK is phenomenal at 0.6 seconds. That right there is what I'm talking about, because now it becomes much more competitive. And just so we're all clear, here's all the information that I've just said right there on screen. This thing does not need any kind of kill to actually get that damage buff, and all you simply need is to become charged with light. And so in this sense, it's a great weapon because you can use this at cross-map distances, close ranges, and somewhere in between if you so choose, and still get that 0.6 second TTK. At the same time, you're always going to have your radar active 24/7 and get a mobility increase, making this thing exotic to begin with. And once you couple all these things together, I'd say that we're looking pretty darn good. For all you guardians who are a little bit more passive, this thing's gonna be right up your alley, guaranteed. Now, something that we're about to cover next is the definition of meta right now in this current sandbox, and it's called the Monte Carlo. And the reason why we're covering the Monte Carlo is because it also happens to have a massive benefit when you're charged with light due to one thing, and that is Markov chain. Now, we'll come back to Markov chain in just a little bit, but for right now, you're also then going to realize that with just the weapon as is, it's already doing 25.2 damage per crit and 15.75 for a body. The reason why you and I both know those exact damage values that I just mentioned is because Bungie already came out in a past swab describing that's what it currently is right now in the game. And with those damage values, it's then doing 1.2 seconds for a body shot TTK and 0.7 seconds for an optimal TTK. 0.7 seconds is just baffling, especially for its first kill, and you can get that fairly regularly, and auto rifles in general aren't that difficult to use, which is why these things right now are currently the meta. But as soon as you become charged with light in general, this thing then does 31 per crit and 19 per body. Looking at nothing but body shots, its body shot TTK is then going to be at 1 second on the dot, but its optimal TTK is significantly better than this at 0.6 seconds. Just so that we don't forget anything that I've just said, here's all those stats that I've just mentioned right there on screen. The thing that I want you to remember here is that you don't need any kind of damage buff to actually get these TTKs, and that right there is excellent. Now, remember what I said from earlier about Markov chain? Well, Markov chain is a damage buffing perk on this thing that makes it go crazy, skyrocketing through the roof. And pretty much Markov chain acts the exact same way as what Swashbuckler does, and so as soon as you happen to get 1 kill, you get a damage buff. As soon as you get 2 kills, damage buff. As soon as you get 3 kills, more of a damage buff, all the way up to Markov chain times 5. And just the same way that Swashbuckler acts, as soon as you happen to get 1 melee kill, you're then going to get Swashbuckler times 5, or in this case, Markov chain times 5, and bada bing bada boom, insane TTKs. When you get Markov chain just by itself, body shot TTK is then going to become 0.9 seconds, and the optimal TTK is 0.5 seconds. Half a second flat is just awesome, and I won't lie, that's pretty darn freaking good, but it can get even better, because once you happen to get Markov chain times 5 and charged with light combined, it's then doing 41 per crit and 26 per body. When this is the case, the weapon's body shot TTK is at 0.7 seconds, and its optimal TTK is 0.4 seconds, and I'm like, what? No freaking way, that's not possible, but sure enough it is. Just that we're all on the same page, here's all the information that I've just said right there on screen. As you all process this information, the one thing that I didn't mention, or rather should mention, is that every single time that you happen to get a melee kill, this does not take away your charged with light status. And so even if you happen to get a melee kill, thus you're then going to proc Markov chain times 5, and you're already charged with light, you still retain that charged with light status, and poof, just like this, you're going to get that 0.4 second TTK, maybe even more so than for any other weapon that we've discussed so far. Food for thought, indeed it is, my friends. And so I want to hear your thoughts on this down in the comment section below as to how frequent that we're actually going to proc that 0.4 second TTK. But in the meantime, the next thing that we're going to look at is one weapon that is certainly overlooked on a regular basis, and that is the Bad Juju. By itself, the Bad Juju is actually a really good exotic, but a lot of Guardians don't really use this thing because its TTKs really aren't that great. And to be more precise, its optimal TTK is only at 0.87 seconds, and its body shot TTK is despicable at 0.6 seconds. However, what I will say is that this thing can become a little bit better as soon as you become charged with light, and that can then become 1.27 seconds for a body shot TTK, and 0.8 seconds for an optimal TTK, doing 30 per crit and 19 per body. As I put all that data right there on screen, you're probably thinking to yourself, Xander, come on, that's really not that great of a TTK decrease, and to you I say, you're right. So rather what we want to look at is what this thing has for exotic perks, and this thing has one of two that's very good, that being String of Curses. Now before we get into the damage output for String of Curses, What I want you to understand is that the bad Juju always is then going to refill the magazine as soon as you happen to get the actual kill, and simultaneously, you're then going to incur more super energy the more kills that you get. And as this is all going down, you're then going to continuously get this damage buff via String of Curses, and when this is times 2, it's then doing 30 per crit and 19 per body, and when this is times 3, it's then doing 33 per crit and 20 per body. And when this is the case, the weapon's body shot TTK is at 1.2 seconds, and its optimal time to kill is at 0.53 seconds, almost half a second flat. And just so that we remember all the stuff that I've just said, here's the information right there on screen. Notice that I did not include String of Curses times 1, and the reason being is because that's actually going to be the exact same body shot and the exact same optimal TTKs as what the weapon's base damage output already is. On the flip side of this though, String of Curses and Charged with Light is going to stack. Let me repeat that. String of Curses times 1 times 2 times 3 all the way up to times 5 and Charged with Light is going to stack together. And for the most cases, I was only able to get around String of Curses times 1 or times 2 and Charged with Light combined together. But that's not to say that you can't, as you can probably get that even higher, and when this is the case, things are going to get melted like a knife through butter. Why do I say this? Well, let me just go ahead and skip right to the punch and say look at that right there on screen. String of Curses times 1 with Charged with Light or String of Curses times 2 with Charged with Light is going to be at an optimal TTK at 0.53 seconds. And that right there is just glorious, my friends, and you can do this in a wide variety of ways. Of all the weapons that we discussed so far, this bad Juju is going to benefit the most from chaining kills back to back to back. And the reason why I say so is because, remember, once you get one kill, it's then going to refill the magazine, charge your overall super, String of Curses then begins, and then when you happen to have Charged with Light status, everything is coupling together to have this marvelous symbiotic relationship, and you just simply can't beat that. And having said this though, I will say that one weapon is actually going to give it a run for its money in terms of its symbiotic relationship, and that is the next weapon that we're going to cover, called the Huckleberry. Now the Huckleberry is one of those very unique weapons where you have to get kills in order for this thing to work properly. And it's actually quite difficult to do so because its recoil control really isn't that great. But I will say that with a little bit of practice, you can land crit after crit after crit and make enemy guardians disappear just like a transformer, aka robots in disguise. Alright, so what's this thing doing for damage output? It's then doing 22 per crit and 16 per body with just the weapon as is, but when it's charged with light, it's then doing 27 per crit and 19 per body. However, what you also gotta understand about this weapon is that it happens to have Ride the Bull, and Ride the Bull perk pretty much makes this thing have a variation in its rate of fire, meaning the first 10 bullets shoot at 720 rounds per minute, the next 12 bullets then shoot somewhere between 720 and 900, and the final 8 bullets are then shooting at 900 rounds per minute. What you also gotta know is that once this thing is masterworked, it then gains an additional perk, but it pretty much allows the weapon to always refill the magazine as soon as you happen to get one kill. And that's then going to increase this weapon's rate of fire to be continuously at 900 rounds per minute if you happen to hold down the trigger. However, if you release that trigger, the process and the rate of fire then gets reset all the way down to 720 once again. You might be asking yourself, okay, well, why is this so important? Just take a look at those PvP stats right there on screen and you'll see why. There is 8 TTK calculations that I had to do just for this one little comparison. But the flip side of this though is that we got some great TTK stats because the weapon with its base damage output can still have an optimal TTK that goes from 0.67 seconds down to 0.53 seconds, and when it's charged with light, that's at 0.57 seconds all the way down to 0.47 seconds. Yeah, I know, a lot of work on my end, but it's totally worth it because now we get to see some juicy, spicy, crispy plays up in here. And the reason why I say that is because the weapon also has a damage buffing perk, Rampage baby. Now as you all know, Rampage can stack once, twice, all the way up to 3 times. And unfortunately, Rampage times 1 isn't really that big of a deal. But with Rampage times 2 and with Rampage times 3, yeah, that's a big deal. And to really see this, I'm going to put all those stats right there on screen. With Rampage times 2, the weapon's optimal time to kill is then approximately at 0.57 seconds down to 0.47 seconds. But with Rampage times 3, that's at 0.5 seconds for a maximum all the way down to 0.4 seconds for a minimum. And I'm just like, what? No freaking way is this possible, but yes, it is, my friends, and that's all indicating if you happen to chain kill to kill to kill. Now, would you believe me if I told you that this could get even better? Yeah, it definitely can. And I'm like, okay, now we're about to cook some marshmallows and we're about to have some delicious s'mores. And I'm like, give me as many as I possibly can, because that's exactly what this Huckleberry is going to do for you and for me. And just so that there's no confusion, I'm going to put those stats that I've done right there on screen. What you're seeing is Rampage times 1 charged with light on top of that, and Rampage times 2 charged with light on top of that. And what we're seeing is that even when you happen to have charged with light times 1 and Rampage times 1, it's doing 0.5 seconds down to 0.4 seconds. But with Rampage times 2 and of course charged with light, it's then 0.4 seconds all the way down to 0.33 seconds, my friends. Yes, yes, yes. Give me some more of those graham crackers, because I'm like, I want some more s'mores, because I can't get enough of them. I don't care if I get a stomachache, because that kind of TTK at 0.33 seconds is totally worth it, and who cares if we get a little sick? I'm like, yeah, Huckleberry baby. Anyways, moving on. The next thing that we're going to cover is the Trinity Ghoul. And the Trinity Ghoul is a marvelous exotic because it can do some very, very cool things, especially for it being a bow. But let's go ahead and look at the weapon's base TTK stats first, and also what charged with light. Just using the weapon as is, its body shot damage is 105, and its crit damage is 156. If you already have the bow completely drawn and the first arrow is ready to go, the time that it takes then to fire that next arrow is only going to be 0.75 seconds. And the same thing is almost said when it's charged with light, and the reason why I say it's a little bit different is because the crit damage is then 186 per crit, and the body shot damage is 126. Just so that we're all crystal clear, here's those stats that I've just said right there on screen. Now, some of you might be thinking, ah heck, that's just some fluff cabbage trash shenanigans, and I'm like, why the heck would I even want to use this thing? To you I say, hold your horses, because what we're not taking into account is Lightning Rod. Trinity Ghoul has this wonderful perk called Lightning Rod, and when it's taken into effect, it can actually chain lightning damage from one guardian to the next. By itself, Lightning Rod is then going to do an additional 3 ticks of 10 damage each, then correlating to an additional 30 points of damage on top of the 156 for a crit and the 105 for a body. However, when you're charged with light and you still have Lightning Rod procced, here's where things get glorious, because when this is the case, it's then going to do 3 ticks at 12 damage each, then correlating and summing to 36 total, and on top of the 186 via that charge with light, instantaneous TTK baby. Hoof, adios, bye-bye. As I put all the information right there on screen, but what you're also noticing is that question mark next to the damage outputs. The reason why I have this is because this is only taking into account guardians by themselves and no chain damage. But when chain damage is taken into account, even the Lightning Rod by itself, without charge with light, can actually one-shot a guardian, and that right there is exceptional. But when guardians are in clusters, say for example a capture point, the Lightning Rod and charge with light just might be able to one-shot not just 1, but potentially 2 and maybe even 3 guardians just like that. Now I've given you something to think about, so before you write out the Trinity Ghoul, take it for a spin, see what it's like in Crucible, and try it out for yourself. Now if you thought that we were done with bows, you'd be wrong, my friends, because the next thing that we're going to cover is another exotic bow, and it's called the Monarche. The weapon by itself is doing 151 per crit and 101 per body. But what you don't know is that as soon as you happen to get that perfect shot, its exotic perks come into play, and it does a poison arrow effect. And this then does a cumulative damage for 24 additional points in total cumulative damage. Unfortunately, it's not quite enough to one-shot a guardian yet by you, but we'll come back to that in a couple of seconds. And as the weapon currently stands, with just as is, it's then going to need a second shot, and when the first one is completely drawn, it's then only going to take 0.72 seconds as the weapon's optimal TTK. On the flip side of this though, the Monarche can get even better, and that's because all you simply need to do is become charged with light, not even have a single kill, and just simply become charged with light. Its damage output then increases to 121 for a body and 181 for a crit, and when you couple that with the damage over time effect of 24, it's then going to become an instantaneous kill, and guardians are going to be like, what the heck did I just get wrecked by? Was that a sniper? No, 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 not today. Say hello to the Monarche. Now I know I said a lot of numbers in a very short amount of time, so I just want to put everything that I've just said right there on screen. As you inspect this, the only other thing that I want you to take away from this is really just to simply notice the damage output, or rather damage over time effect, for having charged with light in the body shot damage. Here you're going to see 32 instead of 24, and I'm not sure as to why this is, but even so, we're going to move on to the next weapon, and that is an SMG, which I think many Guardians have forgotten about, and it's called the Riskrunner. The Riskrunner is one of those weapons that's very fun to use, but it may not be that viable in a lot of situations because it has to be used in close range engagements. In an auto rifle meta that can be used at cross map distances, maybe it's not the best, but let me go ahead and just say that what this weapon is then doing is 17 per crit and 13 per body. When this is the case, it's then going to have a body shot TTK at 1 second on the dot, but its optimal TTK is a little bit better at 0.73 seconds. Intrigued? Okay, I know, but when this thing is actually charged with light, it becomes much better, and in reality, it's then doing 20 per crit and 15 per body. This weapon's body shot TTK, when charged with light, is then going to be at 0.87 seconds, and the weapon's optimal TTK then goes down to 0.6 seconds. As I put all those numbers that I've just said right there on screen, if that wasn't an incentive enough to actually try this weapon, I would actually be inclined to agree with you that it may not still be enough. But what we're not taking into account is this weapon's exotic perks, number 1 being Arc Conductor. As soon as you take damage, more specifically arc damage with this weapon, you're then going to have not just a damage buff, but you're also then going to get a shield that's then going to reduce incoming arc damage against you. When Arc Conductor by itself is just active, it's only going to be a tiny bit of a damage buff increase to 18 per crit and 14 per body. Despite this teeny tiny damage buff, it's actually still going to decrease the TTK to 0.93 seconds for its body shot TTK, and the optimal then becomes 0.67 seconds. Even with that, that may not be quite of an incentive to actually use this thing, but what I will say is that what is going to make it so is once you happen to become charged with light and Arc Conductor is procced, it's then going to have a 0.8 second body shot TTK, but the weapon's optimal TTK is then only going to require 9 crits and thus become 0.53 seconds. Yes, almost half a second flat. And just so we're all clear, here's all the information that I've just said right there on screen. And having said this, the Riskrunner, even though it's actually quite positive, is a very old exotic. But something that's a brand spanking new exotic is a Tommy's Matchbook, and that's what we're going to cover next. When the Tommy's Matchbook is being used just by itself and no types of damage buffing perks, it's then going to do 20.1 per crit and 13.4 for a body. Associating those damage values to a body shot and optimal TTK, we're then going to get 1.17 seconds for a body shot TTK and 0.77 seconds for an optimal time to kill. Is that really viable in this current meta? Maybe not. I'd actually say yes, but what makes it 10 times more viable is when it becomes charged with light. And without having any kind of damage buff, without having any kind of kills, this thing can then do 25 per crit and 17 per body when charged with light. These damage values then associate to a body shot TTK at 0.9 seconds and an optimal time to kill at 0.57 seconds. And just so we're all clear, here's the information that I just said right there on screen. Now what makes the Tommy's Matchbook so unique is the fact that it can actually have exotic traits that are then going to increase its weapon's damage output even more so, with and without charge with light, and that perk is then of course Ignition Trigger. The way in which you get Ignition Trigger to proc is by continuously holding down the trigger until you then become burned, and when you're burned by the weapon, it's then going to increase the weapon's damage output to 31 per crit and 21 per body. When this is the scenario, the weapon's body shot time to kill then becomes 0.77 seconds, just the same as its crit damage from before, but then the weapon's optimal time to kill is just outstanding at 0.5 seconds flat. Yes, you heard me right as I said half a second flat, but this isn't even taken into account when it's charged with light. Oh yeah, Guardians are about to get burned by a freaking fire that's about to incinerate them, known as a Tommy's Matchbook saying hello to my little friend. The reason why I say this is because when it happens to have Ignition Trigger and charge with light, this thing's then doing 37 per crit and 25 for a body. Associating these two things to a body shot TTK and an optimal TTK respectively, it's then going to do 0.57 seconds for a body shot TTK, yeah, you heard that right, body shot TTK, and a respective optimal time to kill at 0.4 seconds. Oh my gosh, I'm like, no way. Once again, this just simply isn't possible, but it is. And as I put all the information right there on screen, it is 110% possible yet again. The beautiful thing about this wonderful Tommy's Matchbook is that you don't need a single kill to get that kind of TTK. All you simply have to do is become charged with light, shoot the weapon continuously until you burn by the weapon, and then once that's the case, you get that 37 per crit and a potential 0.4 second optimal TTK. Of all the weapons that we've discussed so far, not a single one, or at least I believe so, can do this without even having a single kill, and this is the first one of its kind, making it truly worthy of its exotic status. But by all means, I highly recommend you guys to take this thing out into the crucible and try it out for yourself, and if it works, amazing. If it doesn't, that's okay too, at least you gave it a try. Now, something that probably many of you have given a try in the past or are currently trying right now is a wonderful exotic weapon, and it's called the Ace of Spades. I can't mention this kind of list without having the Ace of Spades. The reason being is because this thing can actually 2-tap in one specific manner, and I'll explain that in just a couple of seconds. But before I do so, let me just explain the weapon's base TTK as is. It's then going to have a body shot TTK at 1.73 seconds, and that's just utterly atrocious, detestable, and despicable in so many ways that you never want to land body shots. But for the optimal TTK, it's then going to be at 0.87 seconds. Meh, maybe it's okay, maybe it's not that great. Personally, I think it's just mediocre at best, but when you happen to have this thing with charged with light, that actually isn't changing at all in the slightest, and it's still going to be 0.87 seconds. As you all inspect the data that I'm presenting to you this very second, the only thing that's really changing is the weapon's body shot TTK at 1.3 seconds and the ease of use in gaining that optimal TTK at 0.87 seconds by landing 1 crit in 2 bodies. The same thing is also said even when the Ace of Spades has its wonderful exotic perk proc called Memento Mori. Memento Mori is then going to give the weapon a damage buff as soon as you happen to get 1 kill, and pretty much acts like kill clip on every single other weapon, but it gives you exactly 6 shots, and you can use those even if you happen to reload, only using 4, then you still have 2 left in the magazine. Now where things get oh so juicy, spicy, and crispy up in here is when this thing is having Memento Mori proc in conjunction with Charged with Light. When this thing lands those 2 crits, is it can then get the optimal TTK at 0.43 seconds. As I put all the information right there on screen, I want you to take a little chill pill, sit back, relax, absorb that, because this is how it's done. If you're a hand cannon guy like myself, I can guarantee you that this is definitely going to be a weapon that you're going to use on a very regular basis. But something else that you actually might want to use even more so than this is something else that can one-tap you, yeah, one-tap, and that is the Sturm. The good news though is that as soon as you happen to become simply charged with light from any means necessary, this thing then has the potential to 2-tap you by doing 109 for a crit and 60 for a body. And just getting those 2 critical headshots back to back, this thing then does an optimal TTK at 0.53 seconds when charged with light. And you guys can see all the information that I've just said right there on screen. At this point in time, I'm like, alright, I see you, Sturm. I see what you're doing now. I can get on board with that. But it gets even better because this thing already has a wonderful perk when used with a Drain called Storm and Stress. Pretty much what that perk allows this wonderful combo to do is as soon as you happen to get 1 kill with the Drain, you're then going to get an overcharged bullet back into the Sturm. This is then going to stack from bullet to bullet to bullet, meaning that the more kills that you actually get with your Drain, you're then going to get more overcharged rounds back into your Sturm. And having only the overcharged rounds without, keyword without charge with light, this thing's already then doing 163 for a crit and 91 for a body. As you might have suspected, it can still 2-tap just the same way that it can without that kind of perk and having charged with light. But when you couple these 2 things together, Storm and Stress and charged with light, 1-taps for decades, as that can do 195 for a crit, instantaneous TTK, poof, adios, bye-bye. As I put all the information right there on screen, I personally don't know of any other weapon that's going to make enemy guardians a little bit salty. But by all means, if you know of a different one, then give me your feedback down in the comment section below, as I'm definitely intrigued to hear about that. But one such actual weapon might give it a run for its money, and that is the Tarrabah. At this point in time, many of you are probably thinking, oh come on Xander, another SMG? There is no way this thing can be that good. But to you I say, raise your eyebrow and give a little wink. Because this Tarrabah right here is going to surprise you more than any other weapon that I've discussed so far, and the reason why I know this to be true is just by simply looking at the weapon's base TTK stats as is. It can do 22 per crit and 16 per body, and when we then associate these 2 things to a weapon's optimal damage output and body shot damage output for a TTK, it's then going to be at exactly 1 second on the dot for a body shot TTK, and at 0.67 seconds for the weapon's optimal time to kill. Not too shabby if I would say so myself, but the weapon gets even better as soon as you become charged with light. Remember, you don't need any kind of kill to get this kind of TTK that I'm about to say, and that is 0.5 seconds, my friends. 0.5 seconds on the freaking dot, and that's doing a damage output at 27 per crit and 19 for a body. As I put these two in a side-by-side comparison analysis right there on screen, that's a 0.17 second difference just by simply becoming charged with light and not needing any kind of damage buffing perk or a kill to actually get that. How about now? You intrigued yet? Well, if not, it gets even better, because this Tarrabah can become even more powerful as it happens to have an exotic trait called Ravenous Beast. Ravenous Beast is a damage buffing perk that's then going to become active as soon as you do an X amount of damage on enemy guardians. Usually this is about 2 kills worth, and this can be critical damage or body shot damage. It really doesn't matter as long as you happen to get 2 kills worth of actual damage on enemy guardians. Then you become charged by potentially having Ravenous Beast procced simply by holding square, and poof, just like that, enemy guardians are going to be evaporated, land crits or bodies, and get the exact same body shot or optimal TTK at 0.33 seconds. But it gets even better, as this can be procced together with Charged with Light, and when this is the case, this thing's body shot and optimal time to kill is going to be exactly the same thing, to be precisely 0.27 seconds. Oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind. I'm like, no, it's not possible, but it is, and you guys can see all those stats right there on screen. 0.27 seconds is one of the fastest TTKs that you will ever have in any game, period. It's so freaking fast that you're going to be zapped by lightning, and Zeus, the Greek god himself, isn't even going to know that he tossed a lightning bolt to actually hit you. That's how fast it is, my friends. So if you want a fast weapon, boy oh boy do I gotta say this Tarrabah takes the cake. And if you want a secondary fast weapon, then maybe use that Huckleberry. And having seen all these exotic weapons, Diaslayers, I'm very curious. Let me know which one that you're going to use first down in the comment section below, and how often that you're actually able to get charged with light, doing this perk combination or that perk combination, and get these kind of TTKs that I just mentioned. It doesn't matter if you play aggressive, passive, or somewhere in between, as all these are definitely going to fit some kind of playstyle for you, and when that's the case, I can't wait to hear all about it, and no matter what you guys say, you always know that I'm going to respect your opinions, and that is something that I can guarantee. Lastly, be sure to watch the newest, check the latest, and share a comment like on social media, because you are the greatest. That's much all I've got for you as of right now, Diaslayers, and as always, GG, TNT.